I'm Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Southwest Magazine. January is Alzheimer's Awareness Month, and here to tell us all about it are Mclaughlin and Chandra MacBean from the Alzheimer's Society of New Brunswick. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. We're glad to be back.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm happy to have you back. You were here last January.
Yeah.
This year's theme is risk reduction. So tell us a little bit about why that theme this year and what that means in terms of risk reduction and Alzheimer's. I'm sure a lot of us are doing things already that we're not aware could be actually positive on our lives. Ben, I'll start with you.
As you mentioned, this year's theme is risk reduction. Oftentimes, when we talk about dementia, when we talk about Alzheimer's, we sometimes have this idea that there's nothing that we can do, that it's inevitable, right? That it's an inevitable part of aging, when it doesn't have to be, right? There are ways that we can reduce our risk for developing dementia. Right now, there's no surefire way to completely prevent it, but there are lots of different ways that you can reduce your risk.
Okay, Chandra, tell us a little bit about maybe what some of those ways are.
Yeah, the way I like to describe it is, it doesn't have to be complicated, and it's things like you said, a lot of us are already doing. So things that we know keep our heart and our body healthy, like exercise, eating well, those healthy lifestyle choices that many of us already know and are doing can help to reduce your risk of dementia. When we look at some of the risk factors for developing dementia, diabetes, heart disease, so high blood pressure, obesity, not managing your blood sugars, all of those are risk factors. So if you can keep your heart healthy and do the things that we know we need to do to stay healthy otherwise, it also contributes overall to brain health as well.
And are people must be surprised to learn that, though, when you think of your physical health and how it's tied to your mental health. So is that something that people are unaware of when you bring these kind of things up?
Yeah, I think they are. In fact, when we look at the research and we look at interventions that are in the pipeline, those medications and treatments that we're hopeful will be available to really help to treat dementia. When you look at the effect that those treatments have on dementia versus a healthy lifestyle, healthy lifestyles have a higher impact than any intervention that research has in the pipeline for a treatment. So I think that's a really, it's a really not well-known thing that a healthy lifestyle, healthy choices, exercise, managing your numbers like your blood pressure, your weight, and your blood sugars if you have diabetes, all of those things have a higher impact than any potential treatment that can be available now and even in the future.
Wow. And is it something that you should start doing at a certain age, something you should try to keep in mind your whole life, or something you could maybe catch up with in, let's say, your 60s?
Do you know what? That's my favorite question, because it's never too early and it's never too late to start. Oftentimes we think, if you don't start something by a certain age, it's too late. The reality is, when we look at some of the risk factors for dementia, something as easy as wearing your seatbelt, preventing head trauma, wearing a helmet as a child on your bicycle, all of those things protect your brain and therefore reduce your risk of dementia later in life. Just as someone my age can start, someone in their 60s can start making healthy life choices, and it will help to further reduce your risk. We even say for people living with a diagnosis, if you make those healthy changes, you can live well for longer. So they're literally, it's never too early or ever too late to start really looking at managing your risk.
And you bring up something important, someone who's been diagnosed with dementia. When it comes to risk reduction, what does that mean in terms of them maybe prolonging their health or putting off more serious forms of dementia?
Well, we know that leading or trying to lead more of a healthy lifestyle, even when diagnosed with dementia, can slow down the progression, right? And so, here at the Alzheimer's Society, we understand living with dementia can be really difficult, and it can be a really tough thing to go through. However, up to a certain point, you still are able to live well with dementia, right? And so I think that this is what it really kind of boils down to when we talk about risk reduction is not only are you reducing your risk, but even if you were to develop dementia and be diagnosed, it still contributes enormously to your quality of life.
Yeah, and sometimes people assume that with a diagnosis of dementia, it's all loss, right? So the process of dementia does result in cell loss in the brain. It results in loss of neural pathways. There are blockages that prevent communications in certain areas of the brain. But you can still, with a diagnosis of dementia, create new mental pathways. So, by remaining socially active, which we know helps to reduce risk, by making some of those healthy choices, you can enhance your brain health even with a diagnosis of dementia. Anything you can do to challenge your brain and to keep your brain stimulated. That's why we talk about, having good social habits, making sure to stay socially active. Social isolation, we know, causes so many significant health issues, beyond just mental health issues as well. It can impact your brain. And, finding ways to challenge your brain every single day is a really healthy practice. So crosswords, if that's something you enjoy, Sudoku, learning a new language, learning to play a musical instrument. Some of these things that we choose to do in older life when we have a little bit more time on our hands actually is really, really healthy for your brain.
What's the advice that you give if someone does come early stages dementia? I have someone in my family going through this right now, and when it becomes a personal thing, it is interesting because you see this person's quality of life still stay quite positive, and we have these ideas in our head of what dementia is. I don't get to see this family member a lot, but I get updates a lot, and so it's interesting that it's not what I thought it would be in a very positive way. But I'd love to hear from both of you, when someone does come to you in the early stages, what advice do you give to them in terms of how to manage?
Yeah, so it really depends on the person, right? One of the things that we see when a family first comes to us is there's a period of grieving. It's undeniably a scary diagnosis. It's a life-changing diagnosis. It's a terminal diagnosis, right? So there's grieving and there's processing. And so a lot of times that's some of the conversations we have early on, just to help people process that diagnosis, right? Nobody expects a diagnosis of dementia, and it never comes at a good time, does it? Like ever. So that's generally, we meet people where they are, but in terms of their brain health, we do talk about things that are in your ability to control. And living well with a diagnosis of dementia is not impossible. And so there are brain healthy things you can do to, keep your brain active as long as possible. But also we really like to encourage people to be a part of their own decision making. So there will come a point in time when maybe decision making is more of a challenge. So we really encourage people to think about what they want, what they don't want. What does quality care look like for them? What choices are important to them? What are things that they want, regardless of the stage of dementia they are experiencing? And people often don't think about that. They think about the very practical decisions that need to be made. But how do I feel about my family pet? If I have to, move to a different location, is it possible for me to take my family pet with me? What are the personal choices that are really important to me as a human being? So that's what I would say.
And I think even too, going back to something that you mentioned and a question that you had asked earlier too, about why is risk reduction so important, right? As Chandra mentioned, currently with different treatment options that we have available right now, one of the most effective ways to slow progression is through lifestyle changes, right? And so I think that's why it's so important that although it may be scary, if ever you believe that something might be going on, to reach out, right? Because the sooner the sooner you can get equipped, right? To do your best to handle the unexpected and the unknown, right?
When someone is going into these lifestyle changes, that can be a bit overwhelming, I'm sure, and you wouldn't quite know where to start if it comes down to both mental exercises, lifestyle, fitness. What's the advice you give them on how to start slowly to make these changes that they can also stick to it?
I think starting slowly. Starting slowly, right? It's really important that you don't bite off more than you can chew, right? Because we're human. We're all fallible. We all have our own moments, right? And so when you go out and start to make all these changes and you take on so many different things and you start so many different activities and doing all these different things, it could be a lot, right? Especially as you're trying to navigate, once again, the unknown, the what's to come, right? And so one little misstep or a little slip up can be very discouraging, right? And so it's important to start slow, right? And give yourself a bit of time, give yourself some patience, some grace. You know, what was it? Rome wasn't built in a day. And the same thing about brain health, right? It doesn't happen in a day, and that's okay, right?
Are there a lot of misconceptions that you do? I mean, for me, I would think staying physically fit is important for my heart health, but I wouldn't tie it to dementia necessarily. But you have to navigate a lot of misconceptions.
Well, when you think about the risk factors for dementia, heart disease is a risk factor because we know that mini strokes and those types of cardiovascular events can lead to developing a type of dementia. So, yeah, the things that we do to keep our heart healthy. So a healthy diet, moving 30 minutes a day, those things are really, really important. If you have high blood pressure and you are able to treat it, you know, get your numbers in check. Same with diabetes. If you have high blood sugars or low blood sugars, that's something that you want to manage because untreated diabetes is a risk factor for dementia. So if you have a condition that puts you at risk for developing dementia, make sure to treat it. There are lifestyle choices you can use to treat it, but there's also medications. So that's important to kind of find that balance that works for you. The other thing that we don't think about is a risk factor, or something you can do to reduce your risk is getting a good quality night's sleep. I think we're learning a lot about sleep and how big of a role that plays in a host of different health concerns. But when you think about what happens when we sleep, it's when your brain rests and rejuvenates. Right? And so those processes need to happen in order for us to have a healthy brain.
I was going to say, your sleep health, in North America, it seems to be one of these things that for so many years we prioritize this idea of working ourselves so hard. And it's in a lot of ways what you're having to do is unravel these norms we've created. Is that a challenge from where you're coming from?
Well, I don't think people value sleep as a regenerative tool and a tool in your health and well-being toolbox, but it absolutely is for mental health, but also for the physical health of your brain. It's really, really important. The other risk factor that we don't talk a lot about is hearing loss. So when you experience hearing loss and you're not treated for hearing loss, it puts you at a higher risk for developing dementia.
Wow. Okay, explain that a bit more. That's very interesting. This is totally new to me.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about not being able to hear what's happening in the world around you, kind of the way I help to conceptualize it is there's a lot that you're missing. And so your social world and what you're hearing and what your brain is reacting to diminishes. So certainly having your hearing tested as you age, if you think you're having an issue with your hearing, if you have hearing aids, use them. If my dad is watching this show, Dad, please put in your hearing aids and turn them on. But those are things that are again, not really complicated to do, but something people wouldn't naturally think of to do to reduce their risk of developing dementia.
And we've talked about an active social life too, and that's something I think we just think is a bonus. But why is that so important when it comes to dementia? What role does that play?
So, I mean, we know that loneliness has a myriad of different effects on physical health, right? Social isolation and loneliness has been even noticed by the World Health Organization for its physical effects, right? It causes physical illness, right? And so the same is to be said with dementia. And even then, I think too, there's beyond the medical kind of biological side of understanding dementia and loneliness, there's also the social side too, right? Being able to have a network that you can pull on and lean on in times of need is a really significant factor when we talk about living well and aging well with dementia, right? Having those people that you can call and ask for help is so incredibly important. And I think it's also important to note too that when we talk about social isolation, we talk about loneliness, and we talk about staying socially connected, that's going to look different for everybody.
Absolutely.
Right? You know, for myself, for example, I know that I'm a very outgoing person. However, I need my alone time. I need my alone time, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Because that's my social life. That's what staying socially connected looks like for me, is, you know, staying home on a Friday night and just watching TVs, eating a bag of popcorn, but maybe going out for supper with friends on a Saturday night, right? And so even then, if your social life is, you know, wouldn't be considered as socially active compared to others, if you're okay with that and you're happy with that and you're content with that, then that's okay. Right? That's okay. You don't have to be this big social butterfly. You know, that's not what that means.
Great. Yeah. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
And the connection to brain health, I don't know about you, but when I, you know, when I hang out with friends, when I'm at a big family gathering and I come home, I'm a little bit tired, right? So for me, I know I've used my brain, right? You have to like respond in the moment in conversation, and like you're, you know, remembering, you know, maybe you're remembering things that happened the last time you were together with that group of people. You're talking about current events. You're, you know, remembering people that, you know, are common acquaintances and talking about them. So in that way, staying socially active is another way to really challenge your brain, right? It's a really a different way of engaging your brain. And it's different than doing a crossword puzzle where you can take your time because it's in the moment and you're on your feet.
Right.
So those are things we don't think about in terms of like the health benefits of staying social. It really is like, it's like lifting weights for your brain.
And probably it would go on your memory of your actual life, whereas a crossword might be, what are the things you've learned? But that would trigger the memories
different
of
area
things
of the
you've
brain.
created.
Yeah.
Totally different area of the brain.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious a little bit too about the idea of early diagnosis, because I think it's one of those topics, and again, I can speak to this on a personal level, where you think you have all the tools to address something, but when it comes to being in your own life and someone you care about, even I was in denial, or thought, oh, we all have moments where we don't, and we were trying to figure out without just addressing it head on. And so I wonder how important that is in terms of how your dementia develops. If it's early diagnosed and you get tools in place earlier, how important is that?
That's a great question. And you know, I have worked with the Alzheimer's Society for over 20 years. And when it happened in my family, we were blindsided. So I would encourage anyone who's going through this, it's, I think it's human nature. There are subtle changes in the early stages of dementia, slight personality changes, which frankly, our personalities change as we age. You may, you know, start to forget, you know, people's names. That happens to all of us, right? The difference is when you're unable to recall eventually, and when those changes impact your daily life. So I think because the changes happen so subtly over a long period of time, it's easy to kind of adapt to those changes and mask it, or maybe not see it. So often what we'll hear, actually we're heading into the holidays, and we hear from a lot of families after the holidays because they're like, oh my gosh, I talk to mom on the phone every week, but when I was with her, I really saw the changes. Like, how did I miss it? Because the changes are subtle. So I would say to anyone who's experiencing, you know, what you've just described, like, I think that's a very human part of living with on this journey, right? Is the changes are so subtle in the beginning, it's easy to ignore, maybe to explain away. But getting access to a diagnosis is really important, because the earlier you know what you're dealing with, you can, you know, put some of these risk reduction strategies in place. You can have the important conversations. You can access treatment, which can delay the progression of the disease. It's not going to reverse damage already done. And that's the most important thing is, you know, if you access medications further along in your journey, it may slow the journey from there on in terms of the progression, but it won't reverse the damage that's already done. And so that's a really key thing, is being a part of your own planning, really having time to process the disease and live well for as long as possible, but also, as Ben said earlier, to set up those supports for you and the people in your life who will eventually potentially have to make those decisions down the road.
And I think that the importance, year after year, that importance of early diagnosis becomes greater and greater. Chandra mentioned, a couple different therapies and treatments that are coming down the pipeline. Right now, all of the treatments that we have available really only work best in the early stages. Okay. Right? And so even then, to be able to kind of consider different therapies or different treatments, it has to begin in the early stages, right? And so as more and more of these medications become approved and come out, that importance of early diagnosis is only going to become greater, right? And so it is scary. It's scary to think about, right?
Are there key things that you should look for? If there's names you're forgetting and things like, at what point do you say, I need to check this out? And then what would the first step be?
I think that when we talk about changes to look out for, obviously memory is one of the first kind of telltale signs that we tend to notice. So let's say, for example, you forget the name of someone that you've known your entire life, that you hold very near and dear to you, or there is a family recipe that like the back of your hand, that all of a sudden you can't remember, right? But as Chandra said, it's not just memory, right? Oftentimes, the first kind of changes that we notice isn't just memory. It could be changes in personality. So someone who might have been very warm, very welcoming, very accepting, is now become
maybe more closed off.
Exactly.
Maybe defensive.
Yeah.
We often hear, my mom never said a foul word in her life, and now all of a sudden she's swearing in anger. What is happening? That's a very, very common thing. And the other thing I would add is one of the earliest changes that families share with us is changes in managing finances. So anything that requires abstract thinking, right? So another piece around the abstract thinking, anything that requires logical steps. So a recipe is a great example, right? Missing a step in a recipe that they've done 100 times before. So it is difficult, because the changes can be subtle and they can always be explained by something else, right? A lot of times the early changes that we see are explained away by, is this depression? Which, by the way, is another risk factor for developing dementia, untreated depression. So there's some murky lines in terms of the risk factors and in terms of some of the signs and symptoms.
And I think, too, another really important reason why is sometimes there are other medical conditions or other situations or factors that can mimic the symptoms of dementia.
Absolutely.
One of them, going back to risk factors, sleep, right? We know that good quality sleep can affect your cognition, right? So your memory, your executive function, all your ability to, the abstract thinking with the finances, it can affect that.
And just building on that, a diagnosis of dementia often is comprised of eliminating all of those other things.
Yeah. Right.
Do you have obstructive sleep apnea? Do you have undiagnosed diabetes or untreated depression? So it's a process of elimination. And sometimes treating some of those other issues reduces the symptoms of dementia. But in some cases, it's eliminating those and saying, okay, no, this is a progressive degenerative disease of the brain and not something we can treat.
So no matter what's going on, and another good point to make then is check out what's going on. If you are having memory, it might not be dementia, but it could be something that
could be very treatable.
Yes.
When it comes to treatments, you mentioned there are some medications, but I also know you do some fantastic work at the Society as well. When someone is diagnosed with dementia, what are these options that are available to make their lives as full as they can be?
So at the Alzheimer's Society, we do have lots of different programs, which is really exciting, and more to come. So at the Alzheimer's Society, one of the biggest programs that we offer is the First Link program. And so the First Link program what's really wonderful about the First Link program is it's about accompanying the individual living with dementia and the family and care partners and whoever's involved in that circle of care, accompanying them throughout the journey of the illness, right? Accompanying them out throughout the progression, right? And so what's wonderful about First Link is every couple of months, you can expect to get either a phone call or an email from one of our wonderful First Link coordinators. They'll check in, see how you're doing, see how things are going, see if there's anything that's working really well, see if there's anything that's not really working that well that you could use a bit of helpful guidance with, we'll say. And from there, they kind of help guide the person and the care partners to different resources, different tips, tricks, suggestions. So that's definitely one of the bigger programs that we offer.
Yeah, and just before you go on, the one thing I would mention is for individuals who are saying, oh, is this something I should be concerned about, this change in behavior I'm experiencing or that I'm seeing in someone I care about? You don't have to have a diagnosis of dementia to call us.
Yeah.
Call us if you have concerns. We will help you navigate accessing a diagnosis, understanding the symptoms that you're experiencing. That's one of the amazing things that I love about the organization is you don't have to have a diagnosis. It's pre-diagnosis all the way through the entirety of the journey. And so sometimes people think you have to be diagnosed before you call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So regardless of if the person has an official formal diagnosis or not, and regardless of the type of dementia as well.
Yes.
The Alzheimer's Society, it's a wonderful name, but it's a blessing and a curse as well, because oftentimes some people think that, my mother has vascular dementia, and that's not Alzheimer's dementia. And so I don't qualify for programming. That's not true. It's regardless of the type of dementia.
Any form of dementia.
Any form of dementia, yeah, whether there's a diagnosis or not. So First Link is one of the bigger programs that we offer. We also have our telecounseling and psychotherapy program. So we do have a licensed counseling therapist on staff at the Alzheimer's Society in New Brunswick. Her name's Nicole. Nicole's wonderful. So this is available for care partners of those living with dementia. So this program is acceptance and commitment therapy. And this is provided over the phone as well as by text or by Zoom, and it's free of charge, which is another important thing to note as well. We do also offer memory cafes, or we're starting to offer memory cafes back up.
Such a great program.
Yes. So stay tuned to hear about some announcements as to where they will be set up across the province. We're also offering our caregiver support networks as well, as we were last year. So we have 3 in English online, 1 in French online. We also have 1 young onset, so that's specific for care partners for those living with young onset dementia.
So younger than 65.
Yeah, before the age of 65. But we are once again also getting a couple started back up in community as well, which is really exciting. So there's lots of fun, different things going on at the Alzheimer's Society. And so I think that once again, that's one of the biggest reasons to call, right? Is to get connected to so many different supports and so many different people that can kind of help you throughout that journey.
Well, I thank you both so much for coming in today to share this information. You can come back anytime. I think next I'd like to come see you.
Yes!
We'd love to give you a tour of our dementia-friendly resource center.
Okay, let's do it. 2025. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My guests today have been Mclaughlin and Chandra MacBean from the Alzheimer's Society of New Brunswick. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.